everyone. It's great to see you all. Welcome, and it's really my pleasure to introduce our next speaker. As we like to say, there's no mission without profit. So it's always really interesting to look at what we do as lovers of entertainment and storytelling through the eyes of the money guy. And this is the CFO, and he's the money man. So follow the money is the other thing that we always say, right, to understand where the value is. So I don't want to mess up his credentials, so let me just forgive me if I look it down on my phone for a second. So Nitin Chawla is the CFO of Head of Finance, Strategy and Ops at Warner Brothers Discovery, in charge of content, sales, global brands, franchises, and experiences. Before that, he did a bunch of jobs, really interesting jobs at Disney. He was head of business operations, digital media at Disney Streaming Services. He was VP and GM of Connected Experiences for Games and Interactive Experience. He was also at theme parks. So one of the great things about Nitin is that he really gives us a perspective from both traditional media and new streaming media. And I think here's my one key thought to take away that I know Nitin will talk to you about. We have so much hoopla and so much hype that we have around AI. Let's keep in mind that AI is both a revenue builder and a cost shrinker, right? It can be on both, and so there's different parts of the business that we have, from IP management to production to post-production to marketing to distribution to customer engagement, all the way down to the marketing, which I'm personally excited about, which is the ability to really create personalized experiences based on data that means something and make things more meaningful for the user and the customer. So I think from a CFO's perspective, he's in a wonderful place to be able to tell you everything from start to finish, as opposed to talk about what's getting a lot of press. Look at how AI could actually revolutionize different parts of the business that affects all of us. Because at the end of the day, we all love entertainment, but we also have to make a buck out of it. So Nitin, come on up. Thank you so much for joining us.
Well, it's hard to follow the previous panel, quite frankly, with the amount of energy there was to now coming to making boring money and dollars is a bit of a change of pace, I'm guessing. But yeah, I mean, listen, my job is to figure out how to make sense of all of the disruption that's going on across our industry and still continue to thrive financially so that we can continue to tell great stories and make great movies and keep the Hollywood ecosystem going, but equally importantly, keep the consumer going to come back to our platforms for more and more. But before I get started, I wanted to have a couple of quick caveats. First of all, as much as I work for Warner Brothers Discovery and I work for Disney, what I'm saying in the next 20 to 30 minutes are largely, if not completely, my views. And so if there's any press here, I'm not representing Warner Brothers Discovery in this role. And secondly, because I've spent most of my time in what I call as traditional media or the studio model, a lot of what I'm going to talk about by default will have a lens that is skewed towards traditional media, but a lot of what I'm going to say here actually has much broader application across the entire ecosystem. Listen, we are in the middle of generational disruption. David Zaslav, our CEO, talks about that every living moment. We are also in a moment where generative AI, specifically what it has done in the last 6 to 12 months, is essentially going to redefine the Hollywood for the next 100 years, right? We are in this moment of disruption, but the question is what can we do to make sense of it and position ourselves for the next 100 years? And so I'm going to talk a little bit about that, but for those of you who have any questions, we can save the last 5-7 minutes, or if you have any questions that you believe need to be discussed in between, please interrupt as well. So, I think Guy talked briefly about the perfect storm. He stole my line, actually. But we are in the middle of a perfect storm. And there are 3 key elements to it, right? There's the tension of hundreds of billions of dollars from the traditional media side, so the legacy businesses, which are, unfortunately, almost all in decline, right? And I think the panel talked a little bit about it. There's over $100 billion worth of revenue that still directly or indirectly comes from the linear ecosystem, right? The cable networks, the distributors, or the producers of content. If you look at the entire value chain, we are still talking close to $80 to $100 billion that directly or indirectly is linked to that ecosystem. But it's in massive decline, right? 10 to 12% year-on-year decline. Everybody talked about cord cutting. It's here, and it's here in a very painful way. We went from over 95 million subs, pre-pandemic, to about 70, and is likely to be more like 50. So you're going to be half of that value that's going to get destroyed over the next many, many years, right? If you look at the theatrical model, and there was a conversation on that as well, if you look at our numbers versus pre-pandemic numbers, we are down 30% or 25% year on year, due to over the last 4 years in that ecosystem. The SVOD model has fundamentally changed how people consume and view movies, right? And so that business is shrinking as well. And it's a painful time in the industry. On the other hand, you have new disruptive models, right? Streaming is no longer new anymore, but if you're a consumer of content, this is heaven, right? You went from 7 to 8 hours of content consumption a year in early 2000s to 13 hours of content consumption right now, right? But as a content creator, where do you tap them? They're on TikTok, they're on Instagram, they're on Netflix in one moment, still doing this stuff on Instagram. They're playing games and then coming back to movies to capture the attention. The attention for content has essentially been fragmented like crazy, right? And the new business models as content creators are hard to monetize. Other than Netflix as a distributor that has now sort of claimed profitability that can be made sustainable, I think the jury is out there about how much money can be made in this new paradigm that we are in the middle of, right? So you're caught in this situation where the legacy models are clearly in decline, the new models are unproven, and the consumer is having a party time because they have more content than ever at their fingertips across all the devices that are available to them. Layer on top of that comes AI, and more specifically, generative AI. And why I'm going to talk a little bit about why generative AI is going to be so disruptive to all of this, right? And it creates both opportunities and threats. So what does it really mean? I've thought about it long and hard as a business executive and as a CFO for the last many months about how do you make sense of generative AI starting to play such a role in the middle of so much disruption to our business. And I think there's a way to simplify it. And I think the next slide is not perfect, but that's my attempt at simplifying this construct to say, how do we make sense of all of this? The way I look at it is a classic consultant. Some of you are from consulting here, I'm guessing, or have been ex-consultants. But as a CFO, I have to think about the revenue side of things, and I have to think about the cost side of things. And I have to think about protecting our legacy business because they're still generating hundreds of billions of dollars or tens of billions of dollars for us. And I have to find a way to make money in new media or in new platforms, and how do you do that? And I think there's a way to reconcile all of that with generative AI. Fundamentally, what we're in the middle of is actually redefining Hollywood for the next 100 years, okay? And that's going to be a painful process in the minute, right? But fast forward 20, 30 years, there's no doubt in my mind that AI will be front and center in defining what will become a sustainably profitable model of making money in this business. So let's talk about it a little bit, and how do you navigate all of this to get to the other side? It's not simple. In fact, it's very messy, but I think in my mind, there's a way to think about it and simplify the problem so that we can get after it with some rigor. Firstly, on the legacy media side, it's a defensive play. You can't change the fact that cord cutting is here to stay and will continue to stay here, right? But if from a pure cost and capital allocation perspective, there's an opportunity to really take advantage of AI as a way to take much more cost, much more aggressively out of what I call are the pipes that take linear content to every household, right? The network operations, the fundamental broadcast operations, which are all technology built, will accelerate innovation in a way that can take out costs much more quickly and still create a viable business, quite frankly, at least for the next few years here. For the new distribution models, it's all about scale, right? Whether it's us with our Max platform, or whether it's Disney Plus or Hulu, or et cetera. I think the real opportunity there is for AI to really help accelerate economies of scale to be able to drive more costs out of the system in a way that the businesses get to steady state margins that are sustainable. Netflix is claiming that they want to get to 25 to 30% margin. I think that's a realistic goal for our industry as a whole as well. But none of the players are there yet, right? And I think AI has a huge role to play in that process over the next many years. Now, come to the revenue monetization side. The linear feeds upfronts have become boring, right? I mean, everybody wants to talk about linear, but I think there is still a way to get clever about digitizing our linear feeds and accelerating that so that you're adding to the overall pool of ad inventory that is digitized, available for advertisers to monetize, and for them to feel like they're really getting a true bang for their buck. That's not the case right now. Nielsen reports don't provide you the level of granularity about understanding each consumer at a level of detail that they can feel good about, and I think there's a way for technology to do that. And then, of course, for direct-to-consumer streaming platforms, for legacy and new media companies, I think there's a way for us to really get behind both acquisition and engagement and retention, right? And acquisition is all about using AI as a way to essentially use marketing tools of the future, which can be so targeted and can essentially get you consumers or subscribers to your services much more efficiently than they have ever been done in the past. And engagement is all about personalization. And I think there was some talk about that, but I think there's a lot of nuance to personalization, both for ad light products for subscribers as well as ads-free products. And I think how you use technology that is personalized to understand every consumer on their own merit is something that AI will really accelerate. So this is not panacea by any means, but this is an attempt to simplify the problem and essentially start to figure out how we make this sustainable and how we use AI and use the concept of glass half full, right? I think part of Hollywood has schizophrenia, right? We want to embrace the future, but we want to protect the past. And I think there's a way to reconcile both those in a way that AI can be helpful. So what has happened that is leading to all of this buzz? I mean, of course, we know that intuitively, but it really comes down to the 4 building blocks of content creation, whether it's text, it's images, it's audio, or it's video. Fundamentally, what has happened with generative AI in the last, I would say, 6 to 8 months in particular, is we are now at a path where the critical mass and the critical quality thresholds that are needed for these technologies to start becoming mainstream in content production is here to stay. And that's what is so disruptive about it. We are still in very early innings of this whole in my view, we are not even in the first innings right now. There's still a lot more to be done. But this is the time, if you are somebody who wants to take advantage of AI, now is the time to start testing all of these technologies in a way that you make it sustainable. And then from a demand side perspective, it's a lot, right? Both on the creative side, as well as on the non-creative side of the business, there's immense opportunities to use AI technologies. And most companies are starting to embrace it. I've been very encouraged by what Disney is doing, what we are doing at Warner Brothers. Of course, Netflix has been doing it for a while. I think we are still in very early innings, but I can see a real appetite for, both within companies and outside of it, for us to start to take the bull by the horns here. And this won't be easy, right? I mean, there's still many impediments to it, not the least of it being how do you make these reliable and trustworthy technologies that you can go after. But if we don't try now, we'll start to fall behind, which is why I think even at our company, Warner Brothers Discovery, there's a lot of effort to start to create this organic groundswell within the company to start to figure out how do we use this and how do we make sense of it. Without necessarily jumping with our heads into the water, we are starting to tiptoe to figure out how do you use these technologies. And the impact is all through the value chain, right? Whether you go in the pre-production processes or whether you go in the production processes. I think everybody in the Hollywood ecosystem is going to be impacted by this technology, including talent, as some of you discussed. And I think it only behooves us to all come together in this moment in time to really start to take advantage of this collectively and figure out how do we create the right guardrails and the right rules of engagement and continue the dialogue, because we're going to learn a lot through this process. There's no panacea, like I said, and we're still in the very early innings of all of this. But the more we talk to each other, the more we have forums like these where there are conversations happening, we will start to figure out the right economic model that will become sustainable for the long term. But it does pose a big threat to the traditional studio model, which I am part of, and I'm guessing some of you here are or were part of that ecosystem in the past, there's no doubt in my mind a studio model fast forward 50 years or even 20 years is going to look very different from what it looks right now. And in the middle of between now and then, there's going to be a lot of disruption, a lot of change. But I do believe that for those of us who really take the humility as our core strength versus trying to fight it, I think we'll come out on the other side much more resilient in a way that these models will become sustainable. And so the traditional model of big budget movies will still be there, but probably not $250 or $300 million movies, right? You could still make it at 100 so that it has a real shot, or 150 by using technology. Go ahead. Sorry, there's a question. Oh, no, no. First of all, artists my own thesis on this is very clear. Artists, especially independent artists, are going to be at the core of this whole process.
Well, I'm just wondering why acquisitions departments have been shredded at the large studios.
Have been
Acquisitions departments for indie films.
Yeah.
I'm just wondering why they've been contracted in this period where it seems like if you want to look at new media opportunities,
Right.
it could be a major opportunity to leverage.
I actually agree with you, and I think what you're seeing is a moment in time where there has been a shift in that direction of starting to go more in-house because you can control the cost structure vertically integrated in a vertically integrated model, but I don't think that's a sustainable model. If there becomes more transparency in the ecosystem where there's more understanding of the creative process by third parties in a way that there is more transparency, I think there'll be more co-opting of that. Yeah, potentially. I don't think we are there yet, but I don't disagree with you that AI will have a role in that process as well, for sure. Any other questions? Sorry. If I'm going too fast, please ask me to shut up when I need to. So that's in short where we are at. We are in a moment in time where there's a lot of opportunity and a lot of threat, and I'm an opportunity guy as much as I'm a money-making guy with a lot of skepticism and conservatism. And I think it's very important to balance the two, because what you don't want to do is to discard revenue-making opportunities or profit-making opportunities right now to embrace the future in a way that you've destructed more value. So this transition has to be managed very carefully and responsibly and with a lot of thought. So as a CFO as well, of course, all of this means my job is much harder, right? Because not only do I have to support business executives and leaders of our companies, but I also have to think about how I get support and what kind of support I need as a CFO going into the future. And across a whole bunch of activities in that pool, there's opportunities for AI to play a massive role. We have to be careful about it because reliability of data is everything in our business to make the right decisions. But everything from strategic planning to risk management to functional business intelligence and decision support, I'm being approached almost weekly, believe it or not, with tools and opportunities to use AI more and more. And we are starting to embrace it quite a bit. I don't know if you guys read recently, but Google essentially transformed its entire finance function because of AI tools and being able to do that more efficiently in other parts of the world or even here in the US. And so what that does is, I think it starts to shift the definition of a CFO of the future, right? We are in this situation where the CFOs are not just going to be numbers guys. The bar for being a solid CFO will now be all about being a strong operating executive as well. They will become more chief operating officer-like than being only numbers guys in the background that are feeding numbers up the chain. So the whole definition of what the CFO of the future will look like is undergoing massive transformation as well. And lastly, some thoughts in closing about how we have to treat AI as we start to think about adopting it, and especially in large organizations which are in the hundreds, thousands of people. I think we have to be careful about not getting ahead of our skis here. There's a lot of hype and there's a lot of products out there, but even more reason, because there are more supply of technology than adoption right now, for us on the other side of the fence to take a more cautious approach of continue to look out for the right technologies, but not embracing it without having fully tested its efficacy, if you will. And then there's a whole bunch of stuff that we need to do internally. There's there's change like a lot of companies are actually going to hire, chief AI officers in the future as well, because, imagine the amount of work that it takes to start to transform and change how people work within these companies as well. So a lot more to be done, but I think on balance, I would say this is one area where I feel Hollywood is starting to get its act together sooner than it did with the streaming side of the fence, for sure. And so, yeah, so here's, people ask me how much money should we put in AI and all of that. Those are all great questions. I wish there was a simple answer to that. I think we treat these opportunities always on balance, and we start to look at how much should we, like testing out the opportunities first before we start to invest significantly is the way I think about all of these concepts as well. That's my speech. Did I do okay on time, Claudia? Or no? Yeah. Okay, great.
I have a question. Thank you so much, by the way. Everything you said was very interesting. What do you think is going to be the future of distribution? I know you don't have the answer because everything's changing, but if you had to guess in the next 20 to 25 years, what would distribution look like for film?
Distribution will ultimately look like what consumers will look like, right? Because ultimately consumers are the ones who are consuming content, right? So I think there's no simple answer to that. It's a multi-tiered answer to that, because I do believe there's going to be a role for linear distribution even 10 years out, because there will be still people who, it's going to be much smaller than what it is right now, but there will be a need for appointment-based television viewing even in future. I do think there are some things that are absolutely true. People want content anytime, everywhere, on the go, right? So the idea of almost everybody essentially using a mobile device and some combination of short and long form on the go is going to be the reality. I wish I knew the balance of that content consumption between how much people will have the bandwidth to watch, binge watch shows for times to come. I think that's a harder one, because a lot of that is also going to be dependent on the quality of content that comes out. And I strongly believe that ultimately the quality of content will determine how and when people watch content, right? So I think the onus for Hollywood actually will move to even better engagement with consumers, and the bar for keeping their engagement going is going to be much higher creatively, right? And once that is set, I think if Hollywood can cross that bar for a sustained period of time, I actually believe most of it will be on streaming platforms for times to come. So I do believe that that's where it's all headed.
Is there a content model for scripted entertainment that's comparable to Magnolia, where someone comes not from the A-list, not from the top agencies, but from the skill set to put together a complete platform of content that targets a specific audience? And if so,
100%.
then how does anyone in that creative model get your company to realize the possibility?
Well, I can say I think there's one person in the audience from my team who's here actually, and we think about that long and hard actually, and it's bizarre that you mention it, because those are exactly the kind of models that we are in the model of exploring, where, especially with the amount of money that is being thrown at scripted content at scale, I think the ROI is unproven for a lot of that money, right? So it becomes even more important to start to look at alternate content types, which are potentially much lower budget, but equally engaging, right? In a way to be able to break through and drive that engagement on these platforms. You saw that with, I forget the name of the show, but there was one recently on Freevee, which was like nothing, like somebody spent like a couple of $100,000 per episode on creating that piece of IP, but drove so much engagement on Freevee and ultimately drove more people to go subscribe to Prime Video as well as a result of that. So those are the kind of models that will start to become very interesting.
Mine is quickly. Thank you. So in your experience with everything that you share with us today, do you think qualitative research is going to become a stronger versus the AI impact, or to validate the AI impact, actually?
That's a brilliant question. I never thought about that one. I've thought about all the other questions, but not that. But having said that, listen, I think there's an element of qualitative research and innate understanding of human behavior that happens when people talk to each other to be able to understand what consumers or users really care for and want, that arguably will take a long time for technology to replicate. Now, how you synthesize, analyze that qualitative information, I think can get replicated. But the idea of getting human input in the moment and using that to then determine and shape how content is created, I doubt can be replicated, at least for the foreseeable future. Now, you never say never. 5 to 10 years from now, I think my job could, every job could be at risk, but at this point in time, it's hard to believe how you replace that human interaction to really understand what consumers care for with technology.
Thank you, Nitin. Thank you very much.
Thank you.